I went to the Arkansas Retro Expo with a few games in my backpack that I wanted to trade. Now, in this video, we are going to take these 3 games and trade them to vendors, but we're going to let the vendors pick what they trade for. So starting off, I've got The Legend of Zelda Gold cartridge for the Nintendo Entertainment System, and then we've got Super Mario Kart for the Super Nintendo, and last but not least is Pokemon Yellow for the Nintendo Game Boy. So let's take these out to the expo and see what we can trade for them. The first vendor I went to was Yumi Games. Every time we see each other, we give each other great deals and crazy deals happen. So I wanted to come to him first to give him the proper pick. And that is when I brought out the 3 games and said, okay, here's the deal. I've got 3 games to trade. I want you to pick one and then we can trade. And right off the bat, he knew immediately that he was getting Pokemon Yellow. He kind of explained to me that Pokemon Yellow was the first Pokemon game he had, and he has a copy of it, but it doesn't have a label, and he wanted to upgrade it and said, this is perfect. And so I said, okay, cool. You pick what you want. And he literally gave me the look and then said, I'll give you 3 options. And so we kind of wandered around his booth for a little bit. And first off, right off the bat, he kind of looked right to his consoles. And I knew at this point he was going to do something wild. And that's when he grabbed this Atari 7800 console. And then he looked over around and found this Star Trek game for the Sega Genesis 32X. And then he looked a little bit more and then ended up grabbing this Super Nintendo game from this glass case and looked at me and was like, okay, what do you want to trade for? And I said, here's the deal. You know how this works. I'm going to let you pick. And so he kind of looked around a little bit and said, you know what? I really would like to get rid of that console because they're heavy, they're big. And he said he had been sitting on this for a while. And I was like, if that's what you want to do for this, I am down, but I want you to be comfortable. And we talked back and forth for a little bit. And he said, ultimately, he would rather sell the other 2 games and trade for this Atari 7800, which is totally awesome to me because I don't have one in my collection. But it's also a ridiculous deal. And I was kind of hesitant to do this. But we talked for a little bit more. And that's when he said, he had been sitting on this console for a while now, so he was ready to get rid of this thing. And I was like, well, I don't have a 7800. And he said, it's yours then. We're doing that deal. So I ended up with an Atari 7800, which is pretty awesome. I don't actually have a 7800, but this also plays 2600 games, which is even better. So this might be my new like Atari console that I use regularly. He said he'd been sitting on it for like a year or so, and so he was ready to just move on with it and wanted to trade it. So it worked out for both of us. This console is absolutely ridiculous, and as you can see behind me, there's no longer a CRT, so I'm gonna have to pull that back out so I can play some Atari 2600 games. I'd have to look to see if I even have 7800 games. I'll have to look and pick some up for sure if I don't, though. However, this is a pretty crazy trade to start it off with. So let's go back out and see what else we can trade for. So then I went to the man himself who is actually putting on the Arkansas Retro Expo. Obviously, it's Arkansas pickers here. So we kind of came together and I said, hey, I've got 2 games to trade. Which would you be more interested in trading for? And that's when he looked and grabbed Super Mario Kart. And again, I was like, you decide what you want to trade for. And he kind of gave me that look like, all right, I'll find you something. And so he kind of looked around in his booth, was looking at the Xbox 360 games because I picked up some earlier in this convention. And he then kept looking, and I grabbed the cartridge because, you know, I'm going to have that good shot if I can. And that's when he reached for Romance of the Three Kings 11, which is kind of an interesting game for him to grab out. But this is perfect for me. Honestly, I've never played this game, and we talked a little bit, and he was like, I don't know if I want to make you trade for that. And I was like, that looks awesome. Let's go ahead and do that trade. If you want to trade this, let's do it. And that's when we agreed to do this trade. And honestly, to this is a game that I will definitely play and have too much fun playing. Now, I do absolutely love Age of Empires, and when I kind of flipped this over when we were talking and standing there looking at this thing, this literally feels like it could have been Age of Empires as well, with some interesting twists and turns. So this is a game that I definitely feel comfortable trading for, and this is one of the reasons I love doing these trades like this, is because it's always giving me games that I might not pick up. Like, I didn't have a 7800 console, but now I do, and I'm glad, and I can't wait to test it out. But this is a game that I probably would see the cover and be like, it's probably not my kind of game, and pass it up. But flipping it over, it kind of looks like it's going to be like kind of an interesting game, maybe. I don't know too much about it, I'll be honest with you, but it was complete, which is totally awesome there. And this, I feel like, is just one of those games that, again, like I said, I would pass up, but I'll actually probably enjoy this and have a bunch of fun playing it. So, um, I think this was definitely well worth trading. Now, I know you're probably thinking, why are you trading these games that are like widely known that are amazing? Well, they're duplicates for me, so I don't have a problem trading off a duplicate to get a game that I don't have. So I'm glad to have picked this up from Arkansas Picker. Both of us were happy with the trade, but there's one more we've got to do, so let's go back there. So I headed a few booths over and made my way to Eric Murr's booth, who is, if you don't know, the one who puts on the Oklahoma Gaming Frenzy. And I went to my bag right away, and that's when I pulled out the last game of this video, and that is The Legend of Zelda for the gold cartridge NES. And he was like, I'm definitely interested in trading this. So we ended up talking a little bit. He looked it up to see how much it was worth, because honestly, I didn't look these games up. I just said, hey, these are duplicates. So we looked it up a little bit. He came up with a price he wanted to kind of trade it for. And so I was like, okay, do whatever you're comfortable with. And then he was like, okay, I'll do this amount. And I said, no, 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 you know how this works. We've done this before. And I then said, you got to pick the game. He was like, all right, I love doing this. So he came kind of around his booth. We kind of looked around here, looked at some Super Nintendo games here. He almost picked one, but then put it back down, and then was like, this is close, but a little under. And then he kept looking, and we talked a little bit here and there while he was going through that. Then we kind of rounded this corner here, and I said, hey, you had a nice GameCube selection here, but again, that wasn't something we were trading for. There wasn't anything of the right value. We looked at the Wii games, we looked at the Xbox original, we looked at the Xbox 360 games, mentioned the GameCube here, and kind of talked a little bit more, but then we kind of didn't find anything that we wanted to do. We thought about talking about that, but then when we moved on, we're kind of making small jokes here and there, to be honest with you. And then again, he came out from behind his booth all the way to the front, where we looked through some PlayStation 3 games, some PlayStation 4 games, even the PS2. And then he said, are you sure we can't trade for that? And I was like, I'm interested if you're interested. I said, you get to pick this game. And he was kind of having trouble finding a game that was of the same value. And so he didn't want to screw me over. And I knew he wasn't trying to, and I knew he wasn't. But then he was like, I got a Super Nintendo game over here I think that is worth the trading. So I was like, okay, cool. An NES game for a Super Nintendo game, definitely well worth it. So we got back to the back of his booth, and that's when he grabbed a game I actually don't have in my Super Nintendo collection, and that was Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, which is pretty awesome. To find a Super Nintendo game that I don't already have is something I always love, because they're harder to find in my area. So this was perfect for that. And that ended up being Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, which I think is pretty funny there. Probably not a game I would pick up if I saw this out in the wild. But for this trading series, you guys know how I like to do this. If I can find a game that I don't have, I'm happy to do that trade. And Eric was like, To be honest, this game wasn't as much as he wanted to trade for. He said 30, I think, and this was 25. So being able to kind of still make sure he's comfortable and happy, and I was happy. So we ended up making this deal, and I ended up with Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego for the Super Nintendo, which is a game I've never played before, so I'm gonna have to hook this up and play it as well. So as you can see, I kind of traded for some crazy stuff that was kind of all over the place. Carmen Sandiego for the Super Nintendo looks like it might be an interesting game to play. Then we've got Romance of the Three Kingdoms, which I definitely am interested in. And last but not least is this Atari 7800. This was an absolutely crazy video to kind of put together. I grabbed duplicates from my duplicate box that I had and ended up with some things that I don't have, which is why I like making these types of videos. Finding games in my area that are pretty popular, like Mario Kart, or Zelda, or even Pokemon, is actually pretty easy, but finding things that are a little odd or weird or harder to find just don't really show up in my area very often. So being able to do these kinds of videos where I take something that I have and it's a duplicate and trade it into stuff that I don't have because I haven't seen it in my area makes it definitely well worth it to me. And I'm really happy to make these trades. All of these vendors are absolutely awesome. I'll put some links down below in the description to them. So if you're interested in buying some games, go check those guys out. But I'm about to get out of here because I've got some testing to do on that Atari 7800. I want to play some games on the Atari 2600 that I have. And I haven't played them in a long time. So I'm going to hook this up to my CRT and get to playing that. So I'm going to get out of here. So check that video out right there. But the real question is, do you think you would have traded these games for what I ended up trading for? Would you have kept some of these games? What do you think about this kind of trading idea where I take games that I already have and try to get games that I don't? I think I had a ton of fun playing this kind of trade game, and we made some good trades, so I'm really happy there. So everyone was awesome. This was great, but I got to get out of there. So check that video out if you haven't already.